Hello everybody and welcome to today's discussion about how property investors should go about the process of finding the absolute best property to buy. In other words, how to pick an investment winner. I'm Terry Ryder, founder of the Hotspotting research website, and my special guest today is Miriam Sandkuhler of Property Mavens, an award-winning buyer's agent based in Melbourne, and a best-selling author whose book Property Prosperity is one of the best that I've read about property investment. The previous webinar we did with Miriam as guest presenter was on the subject of 7 common mistakes that property investors make, and it was one of our most popular events of the year. Today's topic, I think, is an extremely important one because it speaks to something that many investors get wrong, selecting the right property in the right location. Every day I get messages from investors who have fixated on a particular location they want to buy in or a particular opportunity that they believe is good, and I'm often mystified at how they've arrived at the decisions they've made. So today we have an opportunity to hear from someone who has built a very successful business around helping buyers find properties with all the right credentials to be outstanding performers as investments. So Miriam Sandkuhler, welcome.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you very much for having me today, and thanks for everybody who's actually tuned in and listening. Really appreciate the fact that you're giving up your time to listen to what we're going to talk about. So we've got a lot of great content to share today. I want to impart as much value as possible. So obviously there'll be an opportunity to ask questions at the end, and there'll be a takeaway offer of some additional resources that you're welcome to download as well. So, a bit typical of nowadays, I just need to put in a disclaimer to let you know that throughout this presentation we're not providing tailored financial, tax, legal or property advice, and we strongly recommend that you seek independent accounting, legal, finance and property advice from an expert before embarking on or actioning any of the information disclosed in the presentation, and then all the relative disclaimers accordingly. So our agenda today, well, we're going to talk about picking an investment winner. There's an attendee offer for everybody and then some questions afterwards. And for anybody who doesn't know who we are and what we do, Terry gave you a brief introduction, but Property Mavens is a specialist property advisory firm. We have expertise in finding what I call high-performing investment grade properties, helping people find the right property for their budget. And in terms of my own qualifications, I'm a licensed estate agent working exclusively as a buyer's agent. I'm an accredited property investment advisor, which is a little bit like a financial advisor, but for direct property only, best-selling author, and I do a lot of media commentary as well. Now, why we do what we do?
Yep. I'll just interject just there. I just want to remind people before you get into your main presentation that if they have questions, and we hope to answer as many as possible at the end of the presentation, they type them into the panel on their screen and I'll be able to put those questions to you in the last sort of 10 or 15 minutes of the hour. So back to you, Miriam.
Fantastic. So just in terms of why we do what we do and why I'm talking to you guys today, so I'm really passionate. I want to ensure that investors don't suffer a financial loss as a result of mistakenly thinking that sales advice is qualified property advice and then mistakenly acting on it. So most investors in the marketplace have got one chance to get it right, so it's important you're getting the right information from the right people, and that's independent advice. Certainly, personally, I want to level the playing field between buyers and sellers of real estate. As you all know, in the marketplace, there's lots of underquoting that goes on and people overpay for properties, so it's understanding where that line is. And we want to support and educate buyers of the best method of investing, and that's by taking a logical and analytical approach, and this is designed to reduce risk and maximise returns to investors. So typically I will touch on some of the problems that lead to mistakes that our investors are coming across, and they do include things such as being susceptible to property spruikers and developers in the marketplace who offer those one-stop shops where they're recommending people buy property through self-managed super funds. As a word of caution there. Obviously you're susceptible to buying poor performing assets, and today we're going to talk about some of the fundamentals you need to consider to minimise that error. Obviously people are time poor and they're busy, so they don't necessarily get the time. And unfortunately, a lot of mum and dad investors think all properties are good investments. And this is because we've had the real estate industry educating consumers for decades that all property goes up in value and everyone can get rich really easily, which, as we know, isn't always the case. There's a lot of conflicting advice in the marketplace, and that can lead to confusion and indecision. People can be very anxious and feel overwhelmed because of the volume of information, and that can lead people to not know where to start, not know what to buy, where to buy it. And of course, as I mentioned before, not knowing the difference between free sales advice and the distinction between independent professional advice. A lot of professional people and business owners in their own right often think they can transfer their professional skills into property investing and negotiating, and that can often bring people unstuck. And analysis paralysis. So if you're all tuning in today, obviously you all love your research. You all know obviously about hotspotting and what Terry and his team provide. But one thing to be aware of is you can get very stuck in overanalyzing and not taking action. And when you don't take action, that's obviously time out of the market, and that can in fact cost you money. So the question is, are you ready to buy? Terry referenced our last webinar, which is the 7 common mistakes investors make. Today I'm going to expand on a couple, 2 to 3 of those points. One of the mistakes was not doing adequate research, and then another mistake in terms of picking the right asset and ensuring it continues to grow is not reviewing your portfolio. And I'll also just briefly touch on, obviously, engaging the right experts. Because as you go through this process, it's important to pick the right asset and make sure it's a high-performing one, but also getting the right experts on at the right time to mitigate your risk and maximise returns. So I always suggest to people, before you go off and start searching the internet or looking on realestate.com, you want to make sure you've seen your accountant or your financial planner, you know how you're structuring or buying that property. You want to make sure you've got an approval in principle in place regarding your lending and that you've spoken to a mortgage broker or your lender. Potentially you might see someone such as myself, a buyer's advocate, to help get advice and guidance or support in that process. And then through the journey, again, before you sign contracts, you want to run them past your solicitor or conveyancer. You might bring in a licence value if you're struggling to determine what the price point is. Again, before bidding at auction or signing an unconditional contract, you want to make sure you've had a building and pest inspection review done. I've time and time again come across properties where we'll walk away from buying because there have been issues that are just insurmountable, and my clients obviously haven't wanted to take that risk. Then making sure that once your contract becomes unconditional, you're engaging professional property managers, you're getting the right insurance brokers on to protect your asset, and then you're getting a quantity surveyor in to make sure that you're claiming all the depreciation benefits that you're entitled to. So let's touch on mistake number 5, not doing adequate research. Well, this is fundamental to picking the right asset. So when we talk about growth drivers, we talk about 2 things. There are macroeconomic factors, and these are the factors that drive demand, what we call the demand and supply equation for a particular area, which I'll expand on shortly. And then the microeconomic factors are the factors that drive demand for a particular property or a particular property type. So most investors understand demand, but they often neglect supply, and this can lead to common mistakes. So when people focus on growth areas or focusing on population growth alone, well, yes, that's one driver, but if you don't take into account the other macroeconomic factors, you can end up buying property in an area where there's high supply but low demand, and that can affect the performance of your property, which I'll expand on shortly. Then, of course, there's the lure of the city. Now, as we've probably heard or you're aware of, there's potential for a massive oversupply of apartments and CBD-based apartments coming into the supply pool. And a lot of those apartments are based in the CBD itself. In Melbourne in particular, we're talking Docklands, South Bank, and even suburbs like Richmond and Paran and South Yarra. So these principles apply regardless of the city that you're in. And also understanding that local council planning changes can make a big difference to the area or the suburb that you want to buy in. So when you are doing your research, what's fundamental to picking an investment winner is asking yourself, does that suburb have the right combination of factors for that property to hold its value during a downturn? So looking at those factors in more detail, what criteria do you need to consider? Well, as I mentioned, macro growth drivers. So you've got to do your research. So there are plenty of free and paid resources available via Google here. Obviously, you've got the hotspotting resources and the research that you're getting from Terry and his team, but you can also look at the ABS, which is the Australian Bureau of Statistics regarding population growth. They have information on housing starts, how many properties are being built where. They have information on people's average weekly earnings, so you get an understanding of the demographic of people buying in the area. And then things like employment opportunities, infrastructure, investment, tourism, land availability, mineral exploration. So we do know that there have been incidences where there have been mining towns around Australia where they've had massive capital growth, but then that industry has come to a halt and people have lost money. So if you want to do research around mineral exploration, you can look at mining investment in Australia. Just Google that and you'll come up with some research sites. Economic reporting sites, different banks, CommSec, Westpac, they've all got different versions of their own opinions on what's happening economically. And even the local real estate institutes of Australia, so it might be the REIV for Victoria, REINSW for New South Wales, REIQ for Queensland. So just have a look at those Institutes of Australia websites, and they've got some good research data for you as well. And then, the Valuer General has got reports, so look into local council reporting and local council websites. They've got good data as well. And then some of the paid data are more along the lines of CoreLogic, RP Data, Australian Property Monitors, Residex, and so forth. So what you're doing is you're actually looking at a snapshot of all of these factors, and this is designed to help you target on a particular region or a particular city, whether it's a metro city or a regional city. And once you get that global picture, then you're in a position to narrow it down even further. And then the next steps in doing that are actually looking at more of the micro factors. So if we take those into consideration, so they're the factors that are driving demand for a particular property or a particular property type in a particular vicinity. So you really want to look at local amenities. You want to look at the home buyer demand in that area versus the investor demand, and actually versus tenant demand. So there's an equation there to consider. And to break it down even further, say for example, you're looking at a particular suburb, well, make sure you get to know that community. Have a drive around. If you're looking at a particular property, what are the proximity to parks, shopping precincts, whether it's a large supermarket or a small shopping strip? What's the entertainment opportunities like? What are the local sporting facilities like? Now, you would have an idea of the demographic who lives in that area based on the macro research that you've done, and you'd be looking at more of that suburb information too. So are they the right sporting facilities for the community that wants to live there? Is it primarily older people who won't need gymnasiums or who may not need basketball centres, or is it primarily families and younger people? Same as hospitals, libraries, schools. Is there a sufficient number of primary schools as well as high schools? What's the public transport like? What's the proximity to public transport like? How many types of public transport are accessible and available if you invest in that area? And you've got a tenant who's obviously going to need to get to work or get out and about. Then we look at the location itself. Now, what I recommend if you are targeting a particular suburb, actually drive around that suburb, get in your car on a Saturday afternoon and literally go from street to street. This will give you the capacity to get a good feel for which are the good pockets or the not so good pockets of an area. Literally, you can sometimes cross a street or cross a main road and it's a totally different feel. So you're really getting a sense of how well properties are maintained, the style of properties in certain pockets, street appeal, things like that. And also by doing that, you can see which side of the street might be the right side to be buying in a particular pocket. Your suburb information and your street information will help you with zoning if it comes to looking at contracts and getting a feel for that. You get to see the traffic and the noise. What's fascinating is you might drive down the street during the week and it's pretty good, but on the weekend there might be a religious facility there where everyone, descends on that area and there's no parking in the street or the surrounding streets for, several hours of the day. So it's important to really get out and just have a really good look around and take notes. Take a map, get a highlight pen out and just take notes as you go. Okay, so then if we talk about drilling down even further, once you've done all of that homework, you've looked in your streets, you've taken note of the pockets of the suburb that you do and don't like, you've even spoken to the local real estate agents to get their input, then we talk about property-specific criteria. So you've done your macro research, you know the areas to be looking in, you've done your suburb-specific research. Well, now it's important that you actually look at the type of property itself. So what's the property built of? What are the materials? Is it weatherboard? Is it fibro? Is it brick? What's the style of it? What's the heritage of it? How much of that type of property is available in the area? If it is brick and it's looking dated, is it something that you could potentially render and smarten up a bit? So you're just really drilling down more specifically into the property itself. Then you have to look at the interior itself. How does it present? Is it in original condition? Has it had a little bit of an update, but that's dated or that's current? Can you do anything to it? Is it something that you can manufacture equity to and add value to by a cosmetic renovation or an update? Can you just replace paint and window furnishings and carpet, or does it need a full renovation? Or is it good to go? So all of that will come into play with your specific strategy. And depending on whether you're buying to hold or whether you're buying to update and flip and sell, or whether you're buying to update or to hold and update and keep, all of that will go to whether or not it ticks your boxes specifically to your strategy. And in terms of any improvements, as I said, what's the age of the interior like? What's the age of the exterior? When was it done? What standard was it done to? What are the fixtures and fittings like? Are they a good brand? Are they of any decent value? Is there a record of the works done? Are there electrical certificates that you can have provided to make sure that all the works pass building code? And does the property pass a building and pest inspection? I would always encourage people to do this, regardless of how recently a property's been renovated. There are plenty of times where builders don't do what they're meant to do in terms of fixing defects or so forth. So if you've at least got that information in a building and pest inspection report, you can know whether or not you want to proceed with purchasing that property and what the cost of those repairs or those additional works may be, and you obviously factor that in when you're purchasing. And then another thing to take into account is the block size. So how big is it? How many square metres is it? What aspect does it have? Which way does it face? Is it a flat block? Has it got a slope on it? If it's got a slope on it, what are the implications of that? Again, it'll come back to your strategy. What are you trying to do to the block? Do you need to extend? Do you want to renovate? Are you trying to build something on the back of it? Are you going to subdivide? So all of that criteria will also come into play to help you make your assessment around whether or not that's a particular property worth proceeding with. And so, as I said, combination of those factors determine if it's worth purchasing, and that's obviously relative to your personal property investment strategy. So first and foremost, know and understand your strategy. And once you're clear on that, that's when you go into the market, obviously, and start doing your due diligence, your research, looking at your macroeconomic factors, looking at your microeconomic factors, and then looking at the property specifically. So there is no such thing as one size fits all. When we're dealing in the property market, you're not buying shares in a company and all those shares are worth the same amount of money. It's a little bit like, looking at fruit. Are you buying an orange, a pear, a banana, a lemon, or a mango? Yes, they all have the fact in common that they're pieces of fruit, but they're all different in their own right. So you've got to assess each property individually. So they're just some ideas on the things to take into account so you can ostensibly make a fully informed decision on how you want to proceed, and that you're taking those factors into consideration to understand how to then apply that information so that you can make an assessment regarding price and the property's ability to increase in value over time. So once you've done that, that's great. You may go ahead and make a purchasing decision and apply the strategy that you've got. One thing to be very careful of, and I just want to reiterate this again this time round, is because I come across people frequently who think that property investing is set and forget, but the reality is markets can change rapidly, including these supply and demand factors we've just spoken about, including opportunities, infrastructure changes, population growth, and local planning and council planning changes. So these changes can work for you and they can also work against you. So it's really important to keep abreast of what's happening with your property and the suburb and the local council regulations in terms of what's going on, and actually review that property every year and then see what the implications are of your findings. So ideally don't fall in love with your property. It makes it harder to sell if the market turns bad, and treat it as a business. Sometimes you've got to make really tough business decisions, but it's about making fully informed decisions so you can actually take the appropriate action. And if you find that your property is not performing well, holding on to a poor performing property without evidence to support that decision in the false hope that things will improve can actually cost investors thousands of dollars in lost equity or capital growth. Now, I've got a case study here. I just want to show you that briefly, and this is an actual client. They, of their own volition, went and bought an off-the-plan one-bedroom apartment in a boutique block in 2010 for $410,000. They didn't really have a clear strategy. They didn't know what they were doing. They took that free advice, not understanding it was sales advice and not understanding that it didn't factor in their risk profile or their goals and objectives, and they purchased that property for $410,000. So fast forward 3 years, they were a bit concerned about it because it wasn't performing very well, and we did an independent portfolio review of that property, and at that stage we illustrated to the client that it had actually dropped in value by about $20,000, and that all of the relative macroeconomic and microeconomic factors pertaining to that property in that area indicated that there was going to be very little opportunity for capital growth moving forward. Unfortunately, those clients really struggled to accept the possibility of making a loss and selling, so they elected to do nothing. And unfortunately, as hundreds of more properties kept coming into the supply pool in the local area, they had to drop their rent because as something shinier and newer came about, tenants wanted to jump over there, and the only way they could continue to attract a tenant was to continue reducing their rent. The property was negatively geared, they were on low income, so they really didn't get much of a tax benefit, and in the end they had to sell it in December last year. And unfortunately the market at the time, due to the oversupply of property of similar nature in the area, which we identified in 2013, meant that they only got $355,000 for it. So that was $35,000 less than if they had sold it when they got us to do the report. And unfortunately, all up, poor asset selection and the wrong strategy caused them a $70,000 cash loss and at least $60,000 in lost capital growth opportunity over that time. So that's what can go wrong when you don't understand how to pick an investment winner. A couple of examples of how to get it right. Well, in this case, with this particular client, Stephen, we were very clear on the suburbs that we were buying in. We were very clear on the pockets of the suburb that we were buying in for him. We were very clear on the type of property that we were buying. And then when it came down to actually assessing that property, we made a purchasing decision on his behalf. So we actually bought this property in 2014 for $760,000 and then appraising it this month that's now up around the $1,050,000 mark. So he's had 38% capital gain in 25 months. The property was renovated at the time, so he had really good depreciation benefits, and it was really easy to lease at market value before settlement because it was the right property in the right location with the right fundamentals to attract the right tenant to enable him to hold that property over time so it could in fact grow in capital value. So great asset selection and the right strategy in his case resulted in a $290,000 capital gain in 25 months, and now he's looking at purchasing another property. Now, you don't have to have a lot of money. These principles that I'm talking about apply across different budgets. This is another case study with a client. Same concept, did all the research for him in terms of working with his budget, working with his strategy, working to suburbs where we saw the ability for uptake in those areas. And then same principles apply. This particular property was a little semi-detached 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom, but on a really big block of land. There's potential at the front of the property to do further development or expand or extend the property forwards to the front of the block. And so in this instance, again, the right property with the right fundamentals that gave him the ability to manufacture equity through that possible extension. We're able to buy it for him in June last year for $470,000. And this year, as at August 2016, we've appraised it conservatively at $550,000. That's just based on his rates notice. I'm sure it's actually worth more than that. But a good example here of how he's had 17% capital growth in 14 months. Similar scenario, it was already renovated, he got some good depreciation benefits because of that, and again it was easy to lease in the market before settlement. So everything that I just discussed with you in terms of drilling down and then drilling down the macro, drilling down the micro, drilling down the suburb, drilling it down to the streets, and then drilling it down to the house itself, that's basically the process that you need to go through in every single instance before you actually make a buying decision, so that you're at least making more of a fully informed decision on that basis. So whether you've got $700,000 to invest, $400,000, $300,000, $1 million, the same principles apply. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I'll just talk a little bit more about what we do very briefly, and then I've got an offer for you. So we do help clients find what I call investment grade properties, get the right property for their budget. We do all the negotiating with estate agents to get the right result. We're very much about ensuring our clients aren't misled and don't overpay for property. And of course, as I indicated, we analyse client property portfolios, and we can provide reporting so that you can make an informed decision around how a property is performing, how it's likely to perform, and whether or not it's appropriate to keep that or sell that on. And in doing so, free up your borrowing capacity to actually go and buy a higher performing property. So thank you so much for your attendance. There are some free resources you can download. You don't need to hand over your contact details. Just feel free to go onto my website, propertymavens.com.au. Have a look at the resources tab, click on where it says property buyer's guides, and there are some tips in there to help you in terms of 7 common mistakes property investors make, home buyers make, and self-managed super fund investors make. It will talk about that research side briefly that I've gone through as well, and will also identify and expand a little bit further on analysing your portfolio review. And then anyone who'd like a free consultation with us, you're welcome to request the same. Again, just hop on the website under the contact section, click free consultation, and we'll definitely be in touch with you. Now, I suppose anyone who has any questions, more than happy to answer those for you.
Okay, well, thank you, Miriam. We do have some questions coming in. I'll just remind people who are out there tuning into the broadcast that if you do have questions, type them into the panel on your screen, and I can put those questions to Miriam now. Miriam, Emily has asked the question. You referred to a few times to what you called investment grade properties, and she's wondering exactly what you mean by that.
Okay, so I classify as investment grade as that sort of top 5–8% of properties in the marketplace that outperform the market. So this is an example of one of those case stories. Applying the principles that I've just described, it's really a case of taking all of that information, analysing it, and making sure it's got most of the right features and criteria attached to that property to ensure that it will perform above the average. So, you know, when I work with clients, we want at least a minimum average 8% return capital growth per annum if we've got a capital growth strategy that we're working to. In reality, most of my clients get between an average 12 to 22% capital growth per annum, and it's knowing and understanding the fundamentals and the criteria attached to the property, the suburb, and so forth that actually determine whether or not it's investment grade. So I hope that answers your question, Emily.
Sarah is asking, do you use particular software, for example, real estate investor type software to find properties for clients?
Look, no, not that website particularly. I mean, we've got a lot of agent relationships where we get a lot of off-market opportunities. Probably 40% of what we buy for our clients is off-market, and the advantage of that is we're not competing with the marketplace, who can get a bit emotional at auction. You can use those websites. They are a way of sourcing what is on market, absolutely. But we look at your typical realestate.com domain, and other assorted free sites in the marketplace. Buy My Place, dare I say, Purple Bricks, which is an interesting experience. If you've ever bought property on there, I haven't. It's just weird. But anyway, so we use the free resources, but absolutely, if you want to use something like Real Estate Investor to make it a little bit more efficient, assuming the property's actually listed on those sites, well then absolutely you can do that too.
Okay. Rajan is asking the question, and it's a good one. I think you suggested driving through the suburb, the streets, etc., before buying, but asking how can you do that if you're buying interstate and without engaging a buyer's agent?
Yeah, don't know. Maybe hop on a plane and go and do it. I personally would never buy a property sight unseen. At the end of the day, you're either there doing it yourself, you're getting someone to help you, and if it's friends or family, or they may or may not be interested, or they may or may not give it the adequate due diligence, or you pay a professional. They're really your options. I mean, one thing I just want to say, people are sometimes resistant to paying a professional to help them, but the reality is you will always pay when you buy property in one way or the other. So whether it's poor asset selection and you end up with negative equity or zero growth or very little growth, that's a form of payment. You just don't realise it at the time. Or you either pay a professional to help you, and yes, you pay money, but in this instance I don't have any clients who complain about the fee that I charge them because of the outcomes that I get them. So Rohan, either hit the ground and do it yourself, or see if you can convince someone to do it for you for free, or pay a professional. They're really your options.
Yeah, I think it's true, Miriam, that people can do a lot of the legwork online. They can do a lot of research, internet resources.
Absolutely.
And they can effectively reduce the amount of time they actually have to spend sort of travelling interstate and physically inspecting properties by doing a lot of the legwork first, and then leaving themselves a day perhaps or a weekend in the location.
Yeah, and Google Maps is great for that. You can zoom up and down on Street View and have a look around. But even then, it doesn't make up for not being there or not physically having eyes on the ground. Because what you see on Google Street View, or when, a real estate agent takes a photo of the property, it might look great, but then, a kilometre away there might be, high tension power lines that are too close to the property that you want to buy. And if you hadn't physically gone on the ground and seen that, you could have very easily missed it. It may be that the photos on Google Maps are now out of date and they're showing you what was a dinky little house next door to the one you're looking at buying, but in reality today they've now built a 3-storey apartment building that wasn't there before, but you're not going to know that unless you've got eyes on the ground. So absolutely use all of the tools, and we use those tools too. Use all of the tools that you can that are online to help you get there, but again, nothing makes up for, feet on the ground and eyes actually looking. And photos are misleading. I just want to say too, when you look at photos online of properties being presented, they take those wide angle shots. They're so clever at making a property or features of a property look bigger than they are, better than they are, the lighting, and it works both ways. You can look at something online and go, God, that looks dreadful, and then be pleasantly surprised when you see it. Or you could look at something online and go, wow, that looks amazing, and then be disappointed. So again, feet on the ground, eyes on the property.
Okay, Rajan again is asking another question. What are your thoughts on buying land and constructing sort of house and land package type approach, as opposed to mostly what you've been talking about as buying existing property?
I don't really have an opinion. It depends on what your strategy is. So again, coming down to mistake number 3 that I've spoken about in the previous webinar, what is your strategy? Does it match your risk profile? Is it in keeping with your goals and objectives? Does it work to your time frame? Have you done it before? If you haven't done it before, what are the risk levels associated with it? My concern around house and land packages is generally you come into that issue of oversupply. I've had prospects or people that I've met with before where they've done exactly that. They've done lots of research and they've bought in areas where there's been an oversupply of land, or from an affordability point of view, they've gone and they've built and they've developed, but they've struggled to get a tenant because the affordability of someone buying and developing their own land and building a house would cost them the same as renting this person's property. You know, they made a fundamental mistake by not understanding the demographic and not understanding the growth drivers in the area. So it will always come back to providing you've done your homework around those macro drivers, providing you understand the supply-demand equation, depending on the purpose of what you're trying to achieve. If all of that stacks up, well, then maybe it's appropriate to proceed. But if you're not factoring all of that in, as well as all of the micro stuff, this is where you can come unstuck. So you've just got to do your research and your due diligence. And as I said, be clear on your risk profile, be clear on your strategy, and make sure it all, you know, ticks the boxes and works.
Frank's asked a question which relates to the general topic of buying apartments, and he says that he's heard that most buyers agents have stopped recommending that their clients buy apartments, whether new or old. And what is your position on buying existing apartments? And if you are buying apartments for some of your clients, what type of apartments are you buying?
Well, I'll take a step back and saying that as a general rule, I don't buy apartments for clients. I don't buy new, I don't buy off the plan, I only ever buy established. But there are exceptions to every rule. There have been circumstances where I have bought established client apartments for clients based on their budget, and that was as a result of them having a variety of options presented to them based on what their money would buy them in varying suburbs, and so we've looked at the micro stuff, and then the decision's been made on an informed basis as to how they wanted to proceed. So again, there's no one size fits all. For the reasons I showed in the example here, this is a perfect reason why never to buy new or off the plan, because of the risk associated with that and what can happen. But if I were to buy for a client and it were to be established, you know, I know people turn around and say, well, buy an Art Deco apartment, that's well and good, but if there's no car parking on title, well, that's a consequence, and a lot of places where they've got Art Deco apartments don't have car parking. Depending on the mix of owner-occupiers versus investors, that'll determine how well the apartment block's going to be maintained or how well it might not be maintained. Depending on the number of properties in the block, ideally you want, you know, less than 10 or even fewer if you can. There does have to be something unique about it. You certainly want to get all of the contracts reviewed very carefully and look what's going on individually on a case-by-case basis within the owner's corporation situation. You know, there are so many things to take into consideration. So I'm not going to say a blanket rule that I would never buy an apartment, because I've probably, over the course of the last sort of decade or so, bought 2 or 3. But they've been very strategy specific, and they've been done based on the client's particular brief and particular strategy. But be careful. Just be careful.
Miriam, you've referred to strategy many times in your presentation. I'm sort of wondering personally, do you find that most people actually have a clear strategy? Because my perception over many years of doing what I do is that most people don't, and they're just looking for property without having it attuned to a clear strategy. What do you find?
Yeah, absolutely. Most people decide, you know, if they've attended a barbecue on the weekend and someone's talked about buying a property and they've decided they're going to go and buy one, and a lot of the time they haven't got their finance sorted, so they don't know what their budget is, and they don't have a clear understanding of what their objectives are and what they're trying to achieve. So the way I work is I take a financial planning approach to property investing, and so that's why I talk about what's your risk profile. You know, are you low risk, moderate risk, high risk? If you're low risk, well, then you don't want to be looking at development site, because that's an incredibly high risk strategy. So probably there's no alignment there. So understanding your risk profile lends towards understanding your strategy. And then what's your objective? Are you trying to make a capital gain? Are you trying to have equity growth, or are you trying to generate cash flow and income? And that'll vary according to your age, your circumstances, your income, your other assets, your time frame, your risk profile. And then from there, it enables you to then take the next step, which is actually going into the market and doing the research we've just described. So very simplistically, are you after capital growth, or are you after cash flow as a priority? You know, and I do say get off the fence and pick one, because you can't have high capital growth and high income. It doesn't work that way. And if you come across it, well, there's some sort of risk attached to it that you're probably not aware of, and it probably is too good to be true, or there's this high risk factor to take into account. So at a minimum, people need to understand what their objective is before they go off and hit the internet and start searching.
Okay. A number of people who came in a little bit late after asking the question, is it possible to get a recording of it? And I just remind everybody listening that everyone who registered for today's webinar will get a full recording in the next couple of days of the presentation. Whether they're listening in live or whether they haven't made it today, everyone who registered will get a copy. A number of questions also, Miriam, just asking general questions about your services and fees, what it costs to engage somebody like you to act on their behalf.
Sure. Well, we offer a variety of different services. So I mentioned before, we buy investment grade property. So we help investors who obviously want higher than average returns. We help home buyers. We help expats. It comes down to the level of service that we offer. So we've got different services. We've got buyer advocacy as a core service, and we offer 3 different levels of service there. We can just auction bid or do the assessment and the negotiation, or do the full search process for you. Prices will vary depending on if we're doing it regionally or metro, so that's all case-by-case basis. And then the property portfolio reviews, and this is a little bit simpler. The review that we did for this particular client here, the portfolio review, we charged $995 for that. My understanding is, and you'll get a 20-plus page report on it. We do cash flow modelling, and if there is a potential of a loss, then we do some modelling around the time it would take to break even. So we factor in your income tax rates and the income of the property and the purchase price of the property. And so you end up with a report that will obviously give you an indication of the ability for the property to grow in value or not, so you can make an informed decision. And my understanding is our $995 fee for that is tax deductible if you have an established property, an investment property, hence the analysis. And so you should get a little bit of relief on that one against your tax. The reason, just to be clear, the reason why I created this particular product and this service is too much of the time people will go and see their accountant, and if their property's not performing, the advice that they get is, oh, look, just hang on to it for 10 years, it'll go up in value. But it's actually inappropriate for an advisor to say that if there's no evidence to support that that's the case. Because if the accountant had said that to Sally and Bill, and they did keep holding on to it based on his advice, and it continued to drop in value, that's a really dangerous statement for anyone to make. And so in this instance, obviously I did the report for them and showed them evidence of why that would happen, and they could have chosen to sell at the time and they would have been better off financially in doing so. So just be careful, be careful of who you ask advice of for properties that you hold, because if they don't understand the factors that will influence a property's ability to go up or down in value, and they're not analysing your property specifically, then they're really not in a position where they should give you an opinion. So just be very aware of who you get your advice from, what's it based on, where's the evidence to support it, because, if these clients had listened to their accountant, obviously it would have cost them money. In this case, they didn't want to deal with the reality of the situation. It cost them anyway, but they made an informed decision to do nothing.
I think, Miriam, it's very important to get advice from specialists in the area that you're seeking advice, and much the same way as journalists for some reason seem to seek commentary on real estate from economists who are not real estate specialists. I think it can be a mistake to seek real estate advice from an accountant. He might have an opinion, but he's not a full-time specialist in that area.
Yeah, absolutely.
advice from someone like yourself who lives and breathes real estate on a daily basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, qualify the person that you're actually talking to. I know with what I do as buyer advocacy, a lot of buyer agents or ex-selling agents who might have sold real estate in a particular suburb, but they may not have all the qualifications and the skill set to be able to analyse a property and its ability to grow in value. So they might not have investment expertise or investment qualifications. You know, and they may be a generalist. You know, they might be really great if you're a home buyer and you want to buy a particular property in the area, and yes, they can talk to you about values having increased. And look, sadly, I've got buyer advocates, I suppose, who are colleagues in the industry who do that, but they keep putting their clients in the same suburbs that keep underperforming time and time again, because that's the pocket that they know about, and for whatever reason they don't want to, or they can't, or they don't go and factor in growth drivers and what's happening where clients can potentially make a lot more money. And I had a case recently where I did a portfolio review for a client. He'd bought it through a competing buyer advocacy firm. He'd had the property for 9 years. It hadn't grown in value. We did the analysis of it, and he accepted the fact that it wasn't a great asset. So I helped him with a bit of vendor advocacy to help him sell that property. And ironically, the same firm that bought it for him actually ended up buying it for another client on the day, following that same strategy of buying the same stuff in the same suburb, even though it's underperforming. And their poor client would have had no idea that he was selling it for the exact reasons that they were being, from an underperformance point of view, that they were being told it was a good property to buy. So very much qualify the expert you're talking to, whether they're a conveyancer, whether they're a building and pest inspector, whether they're a buyer agent. Asked about their investment expertise, asked to see qualifications around it. Make sure that you're paying them as a professional. You know, if you don't pay them directly, they technically don't work for you. Clarify if they're, you know, recommending off the plan on you, and if they're getting a bonus or a marketing fee or a commission or a kickback from someone, because if they are, they definitely aren't working for you. So it's about understanding and asking those questions.
If you're not paying them, somebody else probably is, and that's the person whose interest they'll be representing.
Absolutely. Yep,
Jared
definitely.
has asked the question. I'd love to get your opinion, Miriam, on buying a property that has subdivision potential to produce pretty faster.
Yeah, look, it's a great idea if it's the right thing for your cash flow and your serviceability, if it's the right thing for your risk profile and you're comfortable taking on that type of project and the stress that comes with it and the risk that comes with it, providing you're doing all your right research, going back to your macro and your micro areas, you're buying the right property in the right location in the right suburb, and you're doing all of that due diligence. Absolutely, that's a strategy that people can employ to manufacture equity more quickly.
Now, it seems to me, Miriam, just watching what's coming out of this coverage from Melbourne, it's very much a debate in Melbourne at the moment, where you're based, that there's moves to try and change the town plan in various areas to create extra density to try and incorporate future growth within the existing footprint of the city, and that's becoming quite controversial. But as that process progresses, there probably are going to be more opportunities to buy property where you are allowed to subdivide, whereas currently in some areas you may not be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's where all that macro research comes in that I was talking about. So if I just go back, you know, back a couple of slides. Whoops, hang on, sorry. Yeah, so you want to know what the local councils are doing in the area. You want to know what infrastructure investment's going on. You want to know the basis on which councils are agreeing to rezone areas. But you still have to be really careful. Like I buy in suburbs for clients, and say, for example, where I have bought subdivision sites for clients, you've still got to do your due diligence, because just because you can be in one suburb, you can still have a property that's got a single property covenant on it. So it might be a really big block that you would look at initially and think, wow, I can subdivide this, this is great. But if you don't drill down and look at the contract to know whether or not that particular property in that street with that zoning in the area will actually allow you to do that. So again, due diligence, be careful, get the right experts, you know the questions you need to ask to minimise mistakes and maximise your outcomes.
number of people are asking questions, basically wanting to know where you operate. Are you just in Melbourne? Do you go outside Melbourne and providing services to people? Can people from other parts of the country access at least some of your services?
Yeah, absolutely. So we buy in and around Melbourne Metro. So we also buy regionally in regional Victoria. So depending on if the client's got a capital growth or a cash flow strategy, we work with clients who've got as little as 350,000 to invest, and we deal with everyone on a case-by-case basis because it's not one size fits all, and we tailor to the individual. So as I said, we have different levels of service that we offer. So if anyone would like to have a chat about that, feel free to go onto the website, Property Mavens, as I just said, and you can request a free consultation and we'll get in touch with you and let you know how we might be able to help you.
Dean is wondering whether you help clients with the property development process.
In terms of the actual stages of it?
He doesn't specify as a very succinctly put question, but...
Okay. So in terms of the development process, no, we don't do that ourselves, but where we buy for clients and we buy a development site, we can introduce them to other experts in that field who can help them maximise their outcomes for the property. So, you can't be an expert in everything, and be very wary of anyone that thinks that they are. I obviously have a niche where I work with clients in terms of what I do, and it is about helping them with their capital growth or cash flow strategies, whether it's buying a property to cosmetically update, or whether it's something that's already updated, or whether they're looking for a development site. But once I've transacted that part of it, if they then need help implementing it, I will refer them to other experts that they can interview and engage independently.
Dennis is asking how much should people budget for expert advice when purchasing a property? Is it related to the value of the property and therefore a percentage of the amount that you propose to spend? In terms of the budget you should put aside for getting expert advice?
Yeah, look, I guess it depends on which experts you're engaging. Certainly solicitors and conveyancers, look, it'll vary if you're buying in your own name versus a super fund, but I'd say allow roughly $900 to $1,000 for your contract review. Oh, sorry, not your contract review, your conveyancing. Now, a conveyancer will be cheaper, or in WA, I think it's a settlement agent, will be cheaper than a solicitor. Their advice can, I had one poor client using a solicitor, and what should have been a $1,500 fee ended up being a $5,000 fee. So you just have to be careful at who you're engaging and ask if it's a fixed fee when you bring them on board. A licensed valuer could charge $500 to $600 if you use their services, but you don't have to. Building and pest inspectors, look, their fees will depend on the extent to the level or the quality of the report that they do, and it'll obviously depend on the size of the property as well. So you might be looking at, it could be a $500 report, it could be an $800 report. I mean, I see really cheap reports that don't give you enough information on which to make a fully informed decision, and my clients don't use those services. So maybe, look, conservatively allow for $500 if they're a quality inspector who'll give you a detailed report with photos in it specific to what they're referencing. Same with a pest inspector, again, qualify what you're getting for your money. So it's like anything, pay peanuts, get monkeys, you always get what you pay for. In terms of buyer agents, look, I know some buyer agents who'll bid for $500 for you at an auction. Others will charge $2,500, and again, it'll come down to their expertise and their skill set. Because I say to people, when you're buying at auction, it's not just about sticking your hand up. There's absolute strategy that's employed to make sure that you're the one that purchases the property. So yeah, everyone's costs will vary. Again, interview everyone individually, understand the value that they deliver, more so about the price. But roughly that's sort of a bit of a guide about those experts. Anyway, property managers, same thing. Look, I know real estate agents who've tacked on a property management division and they don't offer any service and they charge a 5% fee, that they don't really manage a property and all they do is put fires out and deliver no service. And then I know people who might charge a 7 or 8% fee and they're absolutely worth their weight in gold, and you never have a problem with your property or a tenant. So think of it in terms of value for money rather than money. And look, property investing is a business. you're not talking about $1,000. You're not buying a TV here. You're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars. And it's about maximising return, minimising risk, and you get what you pay for.
Just touching on your reference to building and pest inspections, Miriam, I've just read recently that sometimes the vendor or the agent will actually provide a pre-done building and pest inspection, and there's been some media sort of warning people that the people you're getting that report from has a vested interest in the sale going ahead, and that's probably false economy to try and save money by using that report.
Well, look, the reality is if a vendor pays for a building report, the legal obligation lies with whoever's paid for it. So, and if they get a little $200 report that ticks the basic stuff but doesn't go into the important detail, again, it's a false economy to think that you're better off using the vendor's report if it's basic and doesn't give you detail versus sticking your hand in your pocket and spending $500 and getting a detailed report. And you know, this is the sort of stuff when I'm working with clients here. I mean, I've had properties where literally sometimes the day of auction, if a client hasn't done a building and pest inspection report, we'll do it. And I had one incident where the client left at last minute. I was just auction bidding for them, and I encouraged them to get the report, and what came out of it were termite issues. There were issues with the levels of the property and stumps having dropped, and there was at least $50,000 to $70,000 worth of problems attached to that property, which I discussed with my client. The ensuing auction failed, to be honest, as a result, and my client didn't buy the property, and thank goodness, and had he have not spent that $500, he would have had a $70,000 problem. So it's worth investing to minimise risk in those instances, absolutely. But I personally, even if a vendor provided a report, that's great, I'd have a look at it, but I'd always, from a due diligence point of view, encourage my client to get their own, paying their own expert and getting a report in their name. A, it's tax deductible. B, if there are any problems with it, you know, the liability lies between you and the person you've engaged.
Yes, I think it's true to say that trying to save money in the due diligence process can often be a serious case of false economy in the way that you've just mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've almost reached the end of our hour. You actually got through your presentation proper very quickly, but
I know I talk a bit quickly, don't I? At least it's left time for questions.
Well, that's right. It's been a blessing in disguise because it has allowed a lot of time for questions, and we have had a lot of people sending through questions. And I think we've got through most of them, probably not all of them. There's always a few that we don't get to. But Miriam, if people do want to follow up and ask further questions or perhaps ask more about your services, the slide on the screen gives a variety of ways through which people can make contact with you.
Absolutely, and I'd love to be able to help anyone on their property journey who would like some professional assistance and guidance to get some really great outcomes.
Okay, well, thank you, Miriam, for a wonderful presentation. I always find it so informative to listen to someone who is at the coalface every day in a market and really understands it right down to that street level. It's quite rare, actually, to hear from media. It's usually full of people making generalisations about real estate, which I find incredibly unhelpful and often misleading. But to listen to someone like you that's a genuine expert in a particular field, I think it's giving real information for people. So thank you again for a wonderful presentation, and thank you to everybody out there today who's been listening. Remind you that everybody will be receiving a copy of the presentation over the next couple of days, including those people who registered but weren't able to make it live today. So once again, thank you, Miriam, and thank you everyone for listening.
Thanks, Terry. Thanks everyone for listening.
Okay.
Bye.